On July 11, 1996, four teenage girls boarded the 11:07 p.m. sleeper train from Cincinnati to Chicago. They never made it to their destination. No witnesses, no evidence, no explanation. The door to their cabin was locked from the inside. Their luggage was untouched. And a Polaroid found weeks later in the abandoned carriage showed 5 people, but only 4 were supposed to be on board. If you're drawn to true crime, unsolved mysteries, and stories that dig deep into the spaces we overlook, subscribe now. August 3, 2025. Location: Norwood Rail, Salvage Yard, Ohio. It was supposed to be closed. The sign said, "So, no trespassing." In bold red, the chain-link gate rusted shut, wrapped with barbed wire in time. But the padlock wasn't locked, just looped. Jonovics, 31, stepped through the breach with a flashlight in one hand and a recorder in the other. The beam cutting through decades of industrial dust. The Rylard hadn't seen an active line in over 15 years. Nature had begun to retake what steel once ruled. Grass cracked through pavement. Vines strangled abandoned cabooses. And graffiti wilted on sun-bleached metal. She'd followed a Reddit thread here. Deep dive rabbit hole. Third-hand rumor. Something tagged urban archaeology meets Midwest horror. She was a podcaster or trying to be. For girls, one locked door, one missing carriage. That was the line that had hooked her. Joe had always been drawn to the kinds of stories that slipped through the cracks of official reports. Police files closed too soon, investigations that never made the news. Voices that were never meant to be heard again. The train sat at the back of the yard, derailed and forgotten. A sleeper car, mostly intact, but corroded at the seams. Its painted number had long faded, but the imprint still remained. Number 166. She stepped closer. The metal under her hand was warm, unnaturally so. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air was still and wrong, like a room that hadn't exhaled in years. Her light passed over bunk beds, peeling leather seats. A discarded deck of cards spread on the floor as if mid-aim. A faint clatter echoed from the far end. She froze. Then the sound again. A soft click. Her recorder, still running, caught a voice. Not hers. "We're not in the train anymore." The voice was low, female, and very close. And just as quickly as it came, it was gone. Joe turned to leave, but her flashlight flickered. In that half-second of strobing light, she saw them 4 shadows seated in the booth to her left looking at her. And in the 5th seat, a man without a face. July 10, 1996. Location: Fort Wright High School. Graduation night. The night didn't feel like an ending. It was humid, electric, the kind of heavy Kentucky heat that stuck to your hair and curled it by the hour. The gymnasium buzzed with flashbulbs, collapsing folding chairs, mothers crying through camera lenses. Outside, kids leaned against their parents' cars, smoking menthols and talking about the future. Like it was a movie they hadn't seen yet. Amelia Glass didn't want to go home. She stood by the vending machines with her best friends, Rowan, Elise, and Maddie, the 4 as people called them. Like they were one organism. They had different last names, different faces, but one laugh, one voice, one history that ran like a thread from grade school through to tonight. They'd made a pact sophomore year in the back of the library during a study hall they never studied through. After graduation, we leave. Not forever, just one trip. It wasn't rebellion. They weren't that dramatic. It was more like a promise to themselves one night when the world didn't belong to someone else. A train ride. Chicago was 8 hours away by rail. They'd picked the 11:07 p.m. sleeper for a reason. Cheap, quiet, weirdly romantic. They booked one cabin. Shared cost. No plans when they got there. Just the idea of coffee on a strange street and a photo taken on someone else's sidewalk. The sun had set by the time Amelia pulled her car around. Rowan was already in the passenger seat, feet on the dash, hair pulled back with one of Maddie's scrunchies. Elise climbed in last, dragging a duffel bag and a bag of cherry licorice. Maddie, always the documentarian, had her Polaroid out, snapping photos in the rearview mirror. They laughed the whole way to Union Terminal. None of them knew that a week later those photographs would be the only things left. The platform smelled like warm metal and engine grease. Lights buzzed above, yellow and flat, casting long shadows beneath benches and luggage carts. Union Terminal had once been grand. Arched ceilings, Art Deco mosaics, a whisper of the 1930s still clinging to the bones. But by the summer of 1996, most of it had been reduced to echo and maintenance delay. The girls didn't mind. This wasn't about glamour. It was about leaving. Amelia pulled the duffel strap tighter over her shoulder and turned in a slow circle, soaking it in. Rowan walked slightly ahead, spinning a Sharpie between her fingers and pointing at signs like she was leading a tour. Maddie snapped a photo of the nearly empty platform, muttering something about how liminal spaces deserve love. Elise yawned and checked her digital watch. 11:07, better not be late. It'll come, Rowan said, tapping a cigarette from a crushed pack and tucking it behind her ear. Trains don't get cold feet. They were 17, fresh out of a small town where nothing happened twice. Everything felt like a movie, standing on the edge of night, waiting to board something they couldn't name yet. Each girl carried it differently. Amelia, the quiet anchor, had always been the storyteller. Her diary, packed in her duffel, was already filled with chapter 1. Escape. Rowan was all bite and bravado. Her family ran a bait shop. She hadn't cried in front of anyone since her mother left. Maddie, the camera girl, hid behind snapshots and lens caps. Her older brother had vanished when she was 12. She'd never stopped look. ING sideways since. Elise was practical, precise, with a laugh that felt earned every time. She carried 3 pens and a paperback she wouldn't finish. None of them noticed the man watching them. He sat in the far corner of the platform, tucked into a bench near the vending machine, partially obscured by a pillar. His eyes never blinked when the station lights flickered. His jacket was too heavy for July, and when the 11:07 train began its slow crawl into the station, horn low and mournful, he stood, but he did not board. Inside carriage 6, the conductor punched their tickets without looking at their faces. Compartment 6B, he mumbled, then louder. Stay seated while the train is in motion. Cafeteria car closes at 1. Carriage 6 was half empty. The corridor lights flickered irregularly, and the vinyl floors clicked under their sneakers. The cabin was compact but cozy. Bunk beds, a fold-down table, small window. Amelia dropped her bag in the corner and sat by the window. Maddie pulled out her Polaroid and began documenting. Let's take one before we mess everything up. The flash was too bright in the small space. The photo developed slowly, colors bleeding into shape, the 4 of them smiling. Maddie held it up and frowned. Wait, is that Elise leaned over? Is what? Nothing. Just a shadow. Maddie slipped the photo into her jacket pocket and didn't look at it again. 12:13 a.m. They were halfway between stations when the lights dimmed briefly, then surged back to life. Outside the window, only darkness. Maddie had drifted to sleep first, curled up on the top bunk with her headphones in. Elise lay opposite, reading under a weak yellow bulb. Rowan sat cross-legged on the floor, rifling through Maddie's camera bag for extra film. Amelia stared out the window. You ever think, she said, about how the world keeps going, even if you disappear? Rowan looked up. You mean like if you die? Not just that, like if we got off this train at some weird stop and never came back. What would change? My mom would kill me. They laughed. Elise threw a rolled-up sock at them. Amelia looked back at the window. Something flickered outside. Brief, indistinct, like a light behind trees. But there were no trees. Not for miles. Did you see that? See what? Never mind. She pressed her hand against the glass. It was cold. 2:08 a.m. The conductor didn't remember seeing them after midnight. That's what he'd tell the police later. He had a logbook. He'd initialed their compartment. He'd walked by twice during his rounds. No sound, no movement. The porter on duty, Clarence Barnes, 67, working his last week, would tell a different story. He'd walked the car at 2 a.m. He remembered 6B. He remembered hearing a soft knock from inside. Not loud, just deliberate. When he opened the peephole, the lights were out, but there was something, a shape sitting at the small table. Not 4 girls, just one person facing the door, smiling. He didn't open it. 7:13 a.m., Chicago Union Station. The train pulled in on time. Passengers disembarked. Porters began their checks. The sun cut through the station's ceiling glass in slanted beams. Compartment 6B was silent. The conductor knocked. No response. He unlocked the door. Inside 4 duffel bags, a box of licorice, a Polaroid camera, lens cracked, resting on the fold-down table. Bunks slept in. A game of gin rummy in progress. Cards still fanned across the tabletop. For mugs, 3 full, 1 knocked over, but no girls. The door had been locked from the inside. No signs of forced exit, no luggage taken, no sound recorded on the car's interior microphone. Rowan, Elise, Maddie, Amelia gone. The compartment window was open. A crack. Outside the edge of the platform, 20 foot down, far below, a janitor noticed something stuck between the rails. Piece of paper. It was the Polaroid from earlier, but now there were 5 figures in the photo. Uli, 11, 1996. Location, Cincinnati Police Headquarters. Missing Persons Division. Detective Daniel Ashford had been up since before dawn. By the time the sun slid over the horizon, warming the metal edges of downtown Cincinnati, his desk phone was already ringing. The first call came from a mother, then another, then another. For teenage girls, all gone. Not late, not rebellious, gone. They had boarded the night train to Chicago. The 11:07 sleeper, same compartment, verified. But somewhere between departure and arrival, something went wrong. By mid-morning, Ashford sat in his office, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The 4 missing persons reports arranged like a compass on his desk. His coffee had gone cold. They didn't just vanish, he thought. They slipped through something. Outside, the air buzzed with heat. Summer in the city always felt stretched, like time didn't move right. Everything slowed just enough for the strange to take hold. He'd seen it before. People who left behind everything except an explanation. But this was different. Felt clean, like someone had scrubbed the details before they even arrived. He started by calling Union Terminal. The voice on the other end belonged to Gina Reeves, Transit Security Supervisor, former Army MP, fast talker. She sounded alert even through the static. Yeah, we've pulled what we have. Not much. Just exterior cameras and the conductor's logs. We're low on internal coverage. Budget cuts. I've got a cassette from Carriage SIXS microphone. It ran the whole route. Want it? Absolutely, Ashford said. Anything visual? Not in that car. Only footage we have is of them boarding. I'll come get it. By early afternoon, Ashford was in the transit office. The building humming with the low electric drone of old fluorescent lights and half-functioning fans. Gina handed him a slim folder and a cassette in a clear plastic case. We pulled their ticket records. They definitely got on at 11:07. All 4 scanned, assigned to compartment 6B. Ashford flipped through the papers. The girls' names were printed in fading inksid. E by side. What about the cabin door? Any reports of tampering? Gina walked over to a file cabinet, pulled out a maintenance log, and turned to a marked page. 2 days ago, that compartment had a door issue. The tech installed a reinforced latch. New mechanism auto-locks when closed. Override only works from inside if it's shut behind them. No one could get in without a key. Ashford finished. She nodded. Exactly. He took the file, the tape, and left without another word. Back at his desk, the building thick with afternoon heat, Ashford slid the tape into his player. Clicked once, then rolled forward with a mechanical hum. For nearly an hour he sat and listened. The sounds were what you'd expect. Metal-on-metal rhythm, distant whistles, cabin creaks, occasionally muffled laughter. Around what he guessed was midnight, the girls' voices became clearer. One of them was humming. Someone shuffled cards. Another giggled. Ashford found himself leaning closer without meaning to. Then the audio changed. 3 knocks. Soft, precise, evenly spaced. Then stillness. He hit rewind. Played it again. 3 knocks. A chill threaded down his arms. Later, he wasn't sure when. A whisper. Not urgent, barely above the static. We're not in the train anymore. It was a girl's voice. The tone wasn't frightened. It sounded confused. Almost calm. Ashford stopped the tape. He needed to talk to someone who'd been on that train. The porter was already waiting in interview room B when Ashford arrived. Clarence Barnes, 67, with deep creases in his forehead and the look of a man who had seen too much and said too little over the years. Ashford shook his hand and sat across from him, flipping open a notebook. You worked Carriage 6 last night? Sure did. Last run before I retire next month. Anything unusual? Clarence scratched his chin at first. No, everything was quiet. Lights a little jumpy in that car. But that's not rare. Ashford scribbled a note. Did you see or hear the girls after departure? No, sir, not directly, but around 2 a.m. I passed 6B. Thought I heard something like knocking. Did you open the door? Number just looked through the peephole. Lights were out, but I swear someone was at the table. Ashford raised an eyebrow. One of the girls. Clarence shook his head slowly. Couldn't say. Shadowy figure just sitting there. Looked like they were waiting for something. Had this smile, but it wasn't right. Ashford paused. Not right how the old porter frowned like it was meant for someone else. That evening, as the heat began to fade and thunderclouds crawled in from the west, an officer from evidence intake knocked on Ashford's door. They missed this during the sweep. Found it tucked behind one of the cabin bunks. He handed over a sealed bag. Inside, a Polaroid. Ashford held it up to the light. For girls smiling, cramped into a booth, background blurred. Another photo followed. This one found in one of the duffel bags. The second image was darker, taken in the same space, but now the expressions were different. Blurred, startled. In the reflection behind them, just over Amelia's shoulder, a figure stood, partially obscured by the window's glare. Not one of the girls, tall, slightly hunched. No visible features, just a silhouette. Ashford stared at it long enough for the edges to blur. He pulled the photos closer and whispered to no one. They didn't leave. They were taken. And he knew without knowing why that this wouldn't be the last photo they'd find. July 12, 1996. Location, Fort Wright, Kentucky. Residential and local press office. The town didn't believe it at first. Fort Wright was the kind of place where bad news usually came slow. Cancer diagnosis, old barns catching fire, the occasional car accident. Missing children didn't happen here, at least not four at once. By Friday morning, the headlines hadn't even reached the Kentucky Evening Herald. But the whispers had started. It was Rowan's Aunt Joyce who made the first call to the press. She stood in her front yard, cordless phone cradled between her cheek and shoulder, dragging a cigarette with one hand and pacing the dry summer grass with the other. 4 of them, she said into the phone. All gone. Train station says they never got off. Families are going out of their minds. You want a story? I just handed it to you. The reporter on the other end, Caleb Price, a 27-year-old junior staffer with more ambition than clout, took the bait. By midday, Caleb was knocking on the front doors of 3 homes in a row. At the Glass residence, Amelia's father showed him the printed train tickets, the laminated ID badge from her school bag, and her favorite denim jacket still hanging by the door. At Elisa's house, her mother had set up a makeshift command center, a corkboard with printed train schedules, the names of the other girls, contact information for anyone remotely involved. At Maddie's home, her older sister pulled Caleb aside, eyes red and hollow. She had her camera. I know she took pictures on the train. You find her bag, you'll find them. Maddie always took pictures when she was nervous. Nervous about what? The sister looked down. She told me that train felt wrong. Said it in passing like a joke. But I remember the way she said it like it wasn't the first time she thought it. Back at the Evening Herald, Caleb filed the piece under the working title. For girls vanished from sleeper train. Police say no signs of foul play, but something doesn't add up. It ran the next morning. Within hours, Ashford's office was flooded with phone calls, but only one mattered. Later that evening, Ashford's office. He wasn't expecting the call. The line was unlisted. Came through dispatch, flagged as non-urgent, but he took it anyway. The voice was rough, older, careful. I read the article, the one about the girls. You are? Name's James Alden. Used to work maintenance on that route. Retired in '89. Ashford leaned forward. Go on. You said they disappeared from carriage 6. Yo, you sure about that? We've got ticket records, conductor statements, even partial surveillance. A long pause. Carriage 6 was decommissioned in '85. Stripped for parts after a derailment outside Terute. Ashford froze. You're telling me carriage 6 shouldn't exist? That's what I'm telling you. Another pause. The hum of the phone line seemed to pulse. I don't know what's running on that track, Alden said finally. But if it's marked carriage 6, then someone built a replica and not just for fun. Ashford scribbled the name and number. Can you meet in person? I've got documents, blueprints, work logs, all boxed up in my garage. You want answers, you'll come to me. But be careful. That car was never meant to carry passengers again. Meanwhile, Fort Wright late night. Back in town, the porch lights stayed on longer than usual. Mothers sat by phones. Fathers walked empty hallways. Bedroom doors remained half open as if their daughters might return quietly in the night, embarrassed at the fuss they'd caused. In the corner of Elisa's bedroom, her journal remained untouched. In Maddie's, a stack of developed photos sat in a shoebox under her bed. In Amelia's, a cassette tape marked for Chicago playlist played on loop until the batteries died. And in Rowan's, the window curtain fluttered slightly, though no wind passed through the screen. At the edge of town, the train tracks curved past the tree line. A teenager walking his dog around 11 p.m. later told his mother he saw a flash of light out there. Brief, unnatural, like lightning, but not from the sky. And somewhere in the distance, a horn blew low, long, but no train ever came. July 13, 1996. Location: Dry Creek, Indiana. Residence of James Alden. The drive to Dry Creek took Ashford nearly 4 hours. He preferred working close to the noise, the hum of streetcars, the bite of coffee machines, the echo of police radios. Silence had a weight to it he never quite trusted. But Dry Creek had no choice in the matter. It was a town made of gravel driveways, overgrown porches, and houses that had leaned too long into their own shadows. James Alden lived alone at the end of a dirt road that used to be a service path for the now-defunct Northern Central Line. When Ashford pulled into the driveway, he saw the house was part workshop, part mausoleum. Wind chimes made from welded bolts hung over the porch. A rail spike was nailed to the mailbox. The man who opened the door looked older than his ears. Grease still lined the creases of his hands. A burn scar curled from his jaw to the base of his throat. His eyes, however, were sharp. Hunter's eyes. "You're the detective," Alden said. "Not a question. You're the one with the train that doesn't exist." Alden didn't smile. "Come on in." The house smelled like motor oil and yellowing paper. Ashford followed him through the narrow hallway and into a back room that looked more like a storage unit than a living space. Dozens of boxes, each labeled by year, were stacked around an old rafting table. Alden waved a hand at a box marked 1985 to 6 series. "Everything I have on Carriage 6 is in there. That car was part of a pilot program. Never went public." Ashford raised an eyebrow. "A pilot for what?" "Containment design," Alden said. "Spatial dampening." He opened the box, pulling out a blueprint, wide and fragile, the corners crumbling. "We called them soft compartments. The idea was to build cabin interiors that isolated vibration, sound, even movement for comfort. That's what they told the contractors, but we knew it was more than that." He laid the blueprint flat. The carriage layout looked normal at first glance. Berths, fold-out tables, lavatories. But toward the center of the diagram, a box was drawn with dotted lines and labeled compartment 6B, experimental fit. 6B had one of the first installs, layered steel with ceramic and lead panels, built-in field dampeners. Problem is, the test runs showed weird effects. What kind of effects? Spatial disorientation. Crew members reporting longer than expected walks between compartments. One guy swore the window showed scenery that didn't match the timetable. Alden pulled out a photo, black and white, grainy. It showed the interior of a train cabin, but something was wrong. The bunk angles looked distorted, bent inward, as if space itself had warped around the frame. This was taken with a fisheye lens, but it wasn't supposed to be. Ashford studied it closely. "You're saying the car distorted light? Light? Sound? Perception? Maybe more? Why build it at all?" There were rumors, quiet funding, defense contractor connections. Some said they were testing passive containment fields to hold subjects or passengers. Ashford raised a brow. "Prisoners?" Alden didn't answer. In '85, Carriage 6 derailed outside Terut. No fatalities, but the incident report blamed a signal issue. He paused. "I was there. I helped pull the panels apart and what we found inside 6B. I've never talked about it. What did you find?" Alden hesitated, then slid another photo from the file. This one was in color. It showed a handprint, but not painted, not natural, embedded in the wall panel, not pressed onto the surface, molded into it. as if the material had softened just long enough for someone to reach through it, and then hardened again. We weren't allowed to document more. They sealed the report, scrapped the car, or so we thought. Ashford set the photo down. Someone rebuilt it. No, Alden said. Someone replicated it, probably from the original specs. But 6B's design was flawed from the start. It doesn't just hold space, it bends it, warps time, maybe even memory. You really believe that? I believe 4 girls are missing. And you found a Polaroid with a 5th person in the picture. Later, back in the car, Ashford sat behind the wheel, hands idle on the steering wheel, the photos and files stacked on the passenger seat beside him. He didn't turn the ignition. He stared ahead into the trees. Something had shifted in the investigation. T was no longer about a disappearance. It was about what happens when you put people in a place that was never meant to hold them. He glanced down at the photo again. The silhouette in the window didn't look like a person caught by accident. It looked positioned. That night, a storm rolled in over the Kentucky hills. Rain swept through Fort Wright in sheets. Thunder rattled the old window panes. At exactly 3:04 a.m., Amelia's father sat bolt upright in bed. No sound woke him. No dream. Just an awareness, as if someone had just stepped out of the room. He stood, walked down the hallway, and opened her door. The room was untouched, but on her pillow lay a Polaroid he didn't recognize. He picked it up with trembling fingers. It showed her Amelia seated at a train table looking directly at the camera, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, and just behind her shoulder, a hand not resting on her, not touching, just hovering inches from her neck. July 14, 1996. Location: Union Terminal, Cincinnati, Ohio. The rain had stopped, but the station still smelled like wet concrete and old electricity. Ashford stood beneath the main rotunda of Union Terminal, watching the morning sun press itself through high stained glass windows. The terminal was quieter than usual, though the steady sound of mop buckets and rolling luggage hinted at life. It was an ordinary place, pretending it hadn't been touched by something strange. He didn't come back for paperwork. He needed to see the space again, feel it, hear the shape of the silence in the corridors, in the service tunnels. The case had stopped being about timelines. It had started asking different questions about space, about absence, about what isn't supposed to be there. David Kelso met him near the station-side entrance with 2 security staff in tow. He carried a clipboard but didn't seem eager to use it. "I've already sent you everything," he said. "You did?" Ashford replied. "I'm not here for footage. I'm here for what didn't make it into the footage." Kelso raised a brow. "Meaning I need to talk to everyone who worked the shift that night. Custodians, signal room, baggage crew, anyone who had eyes on the train when it arrived in Chicago or didn't." Kelso didn't argue. He made a call, gave a few clipped orders, then pointed Ashford to the lower levels. One of the older janitors, a man named Omar Willis, had been there. Still worked odd hours. Still took his coffee black and unsweetened even in July. Ashford found him on his lunch break in the staff lounge, standing by the window, arms crossed like he'd been waiting. "I gave my statement," Omar said. "Didn't leave anything out." Ashford nodded. "Just want to hear it directly." The janitor stayed quiet a moment. "Then I clean the same way every night. Back to front. That's my system. On the morning the girls went missing, I walked the train like usual, and I hit carriage 5. Then I should have seen 6, but it wasn't there." Ashford frowned. "You mean it was missing?" "Gone. Just wasn't. T attached. I thought maybe someone detached it early for maintenance or something, but I checked the schedule. Nothing about a pull." "What happened next?" "I kept walking, came back maybe 20 minutes later, and there it was. Carriage 6 just sitting there like it had been there the whole time." Ashford studied his face. No hesitation, no embellishment. "You sure?" "I know what I saw." The janitor turned back toward the window, then added almost as an afterthought. "There was a smell too, like burned wiring. You ever smell a socket short itself out? Like metal and ozone inside the carriage number just standing near it." Then it faded. Ashford wrote that down and thanked him. As he climbed back up the stairs into the main concourse, he found himself walking more slowly, ears tuned to something beneath the usual rhythm of the terminal. Somewhere beneath the footsteps, beneath the rustle of luggage and the sharp voices of travelers, he felt it again, that unnatural stillness just under the surface. Back in the archives, Ashford asked to review the route schematic again. Gina Reeves pulled it up for him on an old light box. Standard northbound path. Departed Cincinnati at 11:07 p.m. Passed through Lexington, Louisville, Indianapolis. Arrived in Chicago at 7:04 a.m. Except, according to the data logs from the engine car, the full trip lasted 9 hours, not 8. Gina frowned at the screen. Could have been a delay, she offered. Freight interference, signal pause. There's nothing in the logs, no deviation reports, no unscheduled stops. She leaned in. You're saying we lost an hour? I'm saying no one accounted for it. The conductor's notes are clean. Too clean, maybe. No mention of minor anomalies. No mention of passengers from 6B. Ashford stared at the timid again. Then, at the highlighted stretch between Indianapolis and the Chicago arrival, this segment, he said, between 2:12 and 2:42 a.m., there's no activity, no speed logs, no signal confirmations. It's like the train went dark. Gina slowly sat back in her chair. Where the hell was it? He didn't answer. He didn't know how to. That night, just after 1:00 p.m., a mail clerk found a manila envelope sitting in the lost and found. No postage, no sender, no instructions, just a single word written on the front in dark red ink. Ashford. He brought it to the precinct immediately. Ashford opened it under supervision. Inside was a Polaroid, undated, unlabeled, but it showed the same 4 girls seated around the small table inside their train compartment. Amelia leaned forward, lips parted as if she'd just been speaking. Elise looked like she was about to laugh. Maddie was half-turned toward the window. Rowan held up a deck of cards. It wasn't any of the Polaroids already in evidence. The framing was different. The moment captured felt less posed, more candid, less like a memory, and more like a witness. But that wasn't the part that caught his attention. Behind the girls, through the compartment window, was a train platform. An OT Cincinnati, not Chicago. Older stone columns, wood beam ceiling, iron railings, the kind of architecture you'd find in a century-old European town. A sign hung above the platform, partially obscured, the words blurred, but clearly not English. At the edge of the platform, a clock. 2:21 a.m. Ashford turned the photo over on the back in faint pencil. This was the stop. He stared at it for a long time, not blinking, not thinking, just feeling the edges of his certainty begin to fray. The platform didn't match anything on the route. He checked every small town station, every private siding, every military spur. Nothing matched the structure in the image. Nothing even came close, which meant the photo had been taken somewhere off schedule, somewhere not marked on any map. And still, the train had stopped there. Back in Fort Wright, Rowan's Aunt Joyce sat up alone watching television with the volume low. The dog barked once, then went quiet. She muted the set. That was when she heard it. The sound of a train whistle. Low, mournful. Not a recording, not imagination. It didn't come from the old freight line past the quarry. It came from the opposite direction, the hills. She stepped out onto the porch barefoot, arms crossed against the chill. And in the dark above the treein, she saw something impossible. One single carriage moving without tracks. No locomotive, no sound, but the wind. Lights flickering inside. As it passed behind the trees, she caught a glimpse of the last window. A silhouette stood there, watching. Then it disappeared into the trees and the night went silent again. July 15, 1996. Location, Chicago, Illinois. North Line Maintenance Depot. Ashford hated long train rides. Now he hadn't taken a train since the case started. But something about the irony of boarding the same route, Cincinnati to Chicago, made his skin crawl. He opted for a rental car instead. 6 hours on the road straight through. The trip passed in a kind of white noise haze. Farm country blurred past his windows. Every overpass looked the same. Every sign began to fade into the next. Somewhere around R4, he caught himself staring too long at the rearview mirror. Not because of traffic, just the feeling, the sense of something following. He arrived at the North Line Maintenance Depot just after noon. The building itself was older than the station it served. A brick structure with a tin roof and chain link fencing around its perimeter. The kind of place no one gave a second thought to. But Ashford had learned that secrets liked hiding in those spaces. In the margins, the unremarkable, the places no one bothered to check twice. A foreman named Walt Dong met him out front. Mid-60s, thin but solid. Ashford noticed he wore his name stitched into the chest of his coveralls even though no one else was around. "You're the one asking about carriage 6, Walt said. "Not hostile, just tired." "I am," Ashford replied. "I need to see the original logbooks from the morning of July 11th. Tate figured we don't digitize those. Too old school here." Walt led him through a double door and into the back office. "Honestly, I'd have tossed most of the stuff if it weren't for audit compliance." Ashford followed him past rows of filing cabinets and a wall calendar still turned to April. Walt opened one of the drawers, rifled through a stack of black and white logbooks, and pulled out a spiral-bound binder. "Here," he said, tapping the top of the page. "Arrival records for 7:04 a.m. July 11th. Ashford took the book and flipped to the final page. The handwriting was neat, dated, and initialed. Standard entries, carriage numbers, weight logs, brake pressure checks. Everything looked routine until the bottom. A short line written in a different hand. Less neat, as if hurried. 5 disembarked, for expected. No signature, no initials. Ashford stared at it. "Who wrote this?" Walt leaned over. "That's not my handwriting. Not Ralph's either. We're the only two who work this section. No chance it was a third-party tech. Number we had no contractors that week." Ashford held the book closer, scanning the ink. The pen stroke was dry, uneven. Older ballpoint. Whoever wrote this knew there were only 4 girls in that compartment. Walt frowned. Then why'd they write 5? Ashford didn't answer. He copied the line into his notes carefully, as if reproducing it might reveal something the original didn't. Later, in the maintenance lot behind the depot, he asked to walk the perimeter of the arrival track. Walt humored him, unlocking a rusted gate that hadn't squealed open in months. Ashford followed the rails on foot. Sunlight bounced off the steel. Weeds had grown tall between the ties. He passed the exact stretch where carriage 6 would have stopped, the spot where the compartment door would have opened if it opened at all. There was no sign of disturbance, nothing to mark it from any other car's arrival. But halfway down the length of the platform, just before the service stairwell, he found something odd. A rail spike, new, untarnished, no rust, just placed there. He bent down to inspect it. It hadn't been driven in. It rested lightly on the gravel. He picked it up and turned it in his hand. Stamped into the steel were 3 digits. 221. He pocketed it without telling Walt. By evening, Ashford checked into a small downtown hotel with a sagging mattress and a window that didn't quite close all the way. He left the light on longer than usual. He laid the copied logbook entry on the nightstand. 5 disembarked, for expected 1 extra. At 3:33 a.m., Ashford woke from a sound sleep, heart pounding. There had been no noise, just a presence. He sat up sweating. His room was cold, too cold for mid-July. In the dim orange glow of the bedside lamp, something caught his eye. On the floor, just in front of the door, sat an envelope, unmarked. He hadn't heard anyone slip it under. No footsteps in the hall, no rustle. He picked it up slowly. Inside, another Polaroid. Me compartment. The girls again. This time the angle was slightly different, lower from the hallway, almost like someone peering in through the open door. But there was something wrong. Amelia, Elise, Maddie, Rowan present. But behind them, barely visible in the mirror above the sink, was a tall figure. Closer this time, more defined. You could almost make out a face, almost but not quite. He turned the photo over. No writing this time, just a smear of what looked like grease dragged by a thumb. Ashford stared at it for a long time, then got up and pulled the desk chair in front of the door. He didn't sleep again that night. July 16, 1996. Location, Fort Wright, Kentucky. Maddie's bedroom. The bedroom hadn't been touched in 6 days. Dust settled in the corners. The bed sheets were still creased from where Maddie had folded them down. A dog-eared copy of Catcher in the Rye lay face down on the desk. Her camera bag sat in the corner, half-zipped, missing the Polaroid camera that had since become evidence. Maddie's older sister, Claire, stood just inside the doorway. She hadn't crossed the threshold since the day the phone rang. It felt like breaking something just to be in there. But that morning, she'd gotten up before her mother, made coffee that she didn't drink, and come here because something was bothering her. She remembered Maddie talking the night before she left. Just snippets. I might record the trip, not on camera, something more real. Claire didn't think much of it at the time. Maddie was always making audio collages, ambient stuff, Tape hiss, background conversations, snatches of radio between stations. It was how she processed things. So Claire began to search. Took her 20 minutes. She found the cassette buried beneath the mattress, wrapped in an old concert flyer and a pair of headphones labeled in black marker. Listen when I get back. She held it for a long time before calling Detective Ashford. By late afternoon, Ashford was back in Fort Wright. He'd driven straight through from Chicago without stopping. He hadn't even unpacked. The logbook was still in the passenger seat. The Polaroid from the hotel still in his coat. Claire met him at the door. I didn't listen to it, she said. You did the right thing, Ashford replied. They sat on the edge of Maddie's bed. Claire watched from the doorway, arms crossed, refusing to come closer. Ashford clicked the tape into an old Sony Walkman Claire had found in a junk drawer. Then he pressed play. The first few seconds were nothing, just static hiss. The soft whir of the tape moving, then faintly laughter. A voice. Elise. Is it recording? Another voice. Rowan. Yeah, I think so. Hey, Maddie. This thing going to steal our souls? Maddie's voice came through next. Only your bad side? The sound was muffled, echoing slightly like it had been recorded inside the train compartment. He could hear the soft thud of movement, bags hitting the floor, zippers, the metallic click of the compartment door sliding. G shut. Then Amelia's voice, clear and steady. Okay, so we're officially in motion. 11:13 p.m. We're somewhere near Newport. If this is our last recording, tell my parents I want my Walkman buried with me. Another laugh, then quiet. The girls began chatting. Mundane things. What snacks they brought. What seats smelled weird. Maddie sang a few seconds of something unintelligible. Elise read out loud from a bad horoscope in a magazine. Then something changed. It was subtle, a kind of hum, faint but unnatural, like a low frequency beneath the normal cabin noise. Ashford adjusted the volume. The girls didn't seem to notice. Amelia, does it feel like we're slowing down? Rowan. Nah, you just got motion brain. Elise, no, I feel it too. There was a pause, then the soft sound of cards being shuffled. Maddie. Guys. Did someone just walk past the door? Rowan, Porter, probably. Elise, they don't come around this early. Amelia, guys, silence. Then the knock. 3 soft knocks. Rhythmic, deliberate, just like the ones on the microphone tape from Carriage 6. But now it was closer, sharper, as if whoever knocked had done it right beside the recorder. Rowan. Did someone lock the door? Maddie, no, I didn't touch it. Elise, try the handle. Shuffle. Click. Amelia, it's stuck. Then static again. Louder now. Piercing, a sharp distortion like the tape was crumpling. But the Walkman kept spinning. And then a voice. Not one of the girls, not even human exactly. Low, like someone mimicking speech after years of silence. Still slow, curious. You are not from here. Ashford's breath caught in his throat. On the tape, the girls didn't scream. They didn't say anything at all. There was just breathing. The kind that makes your own lungs tighten. Then the voice again. One must stay. Claire turned away, covering her mouth. The tape warbled. Time skipped. Another sound. A high-pitched metallic scrape. Then footsteps. And finally, just before the tape cut out, Maddie's voice whispering. It's inside the wall. Click. The tape stopped. Ashford didn't move. He rewound the last 10 seconds. Played it again. Listened to her say it a second time. It's inside the wall. Claire spoke barely above a whisper. What does that mean? Ashford shook his head. I don't know yet, but something cold had settled into his spine. Not fear exactly. Something older, a recognition, like something brushing against the edge of memory. He turned off the recorder and stood. Before he left, Claire handed him a second tape. I didn't play this one either. No label. It was in the same box. He took it without asking. That night, back in his motel, Ashford waited until after midnight to press play. The second tape wasn't ambient. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't Maddie's voice. It was recorded silence. A stillness so deep, so perfect that it made his ears ache. And in that silence, a sound began to rise. Slow, almost imperceptible. A single rhythmic breath. Inhale, exhale, but not human. And then layered beneath it a faint knock. Then another. And then a second breath. July 17, 1996. Location, Northern Kentucky. Abandoned rail substation. It wasn't on any current maps. Ashford only found the substation after chasing down an anonymous fax sent to his office that morning. A single sentence typed in courier font. Nothing else. If you want to know what's inside the wall, check the old substation. Harland Line Mile 43. No sender, no traceable number, just coordinates pointing to a place that hadn't been in service since the early 80s. Took him an hour to find it. Buried at the end of a gravel path swallowed by undergrowth and trees that leaned in too close. A rusted sign hung crooked on the fence. U.S. Transit Substation 43. No entry. The gate wasn't locked. The building itself was smaller than expected. Concrete, 2 stories, narrow windows like slits. The kind of architecture built for utility, not people. Moss covered most of the roof line. The front door had been broken open long ago. The hinges rusted in place. Ashford stepped inside. The air was sour, dust, mildew, and something else. Mechanical decay, the kind of smell that clings to old wires and burned circuits. He kept one hand on his flashlight, even though light streamed weakly through the broken windows. Inside, the building was silent except for the faint drip of water in the walls. A central corridor ran the length of the structure with branching side rooms, breaker control, line monitors, field rouetting, all stripped. Most of the panels were gutted, copper wiring stolen, papers gone. He was about to turn back when he noticed something odd in the far corner. A locked panel door. Unlike the others, this one was still intact, painted red, labeled Archive Engine P6B/22 SEC. Access only. He crouched. The door was rusted shut, but not solidly. A few kicks and it cracked open with a groan. Behind it, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. No lights, no handrails, just concrete steps choked with dust and spider webs. He descended slowly. The temperature dropped immediately. By the time he reached the bottom, it felt 10 degrees cooler. The subble was only one room, maybe 30 feet across. Metal shelves lined the walls, most of them empty. A few boxes remained, collapsed and molding. But what stopped him cold was what covered the far wall. A full-length blueprint, yellowed and curling at the edges, pinned directly to the concrete. He moved closer. At first, it looked like another carriage diagram. Standard layout, compartments, mechanical systems, but this one had annotations, notes scrolled in red ink, circled phrases. Compartment 6B, soft chamber variant C. Failsafe override not to be installed per legal. Warning, emergency transfer protocol must be disengaged manually. And beneath all that, a hand-drawn symbol, a square inside a square inside a circle. No legend, no explanation. Pinned next to the diagram, half-torn, was a note. If breach occurs during transit, do not approach internal perimeter. Transfer field is directional. Reversals unpredictable. Ashford stared at the words. He could hear his own breathing in the silence. Transfer field. Directional reversals. It wasn't a train car. Not exactly. It was a containment chamber. Something designed to move or to carry something that couldn't move itself. He checked the bottom corner of the blueprint, a stamp date, April 1984, and beneath that, a name. J. Alden James. Alden had lied, or at least he hadn't told everything. Ashford photographed the entire wall, then began scanning the remaining shelves. He found a binder sealed in plastic. The cover read Project Spiral Hatch Subcontract Report DOD/Ecarancet. Inside were pages of typed reports, thermal failure tests, acoustic anomalies, psychological field assessments. One entry caught his attention. Test 011. Subject non-staff. Unscheduled entry. Compartment 6. B. Result. Subject unable to locate exit door once closed. Secondary result. Subject reported hearing himself speak before he did. Test discontinued. Personnel withdrawn. Outcome. Field temporal feedback sustained longer than safe duration. Comments. Subject removed. Not recovered. Removed. Not recovered. He took the binder. As he turned to leave, something flickered behind him. A sound. Not mechanical, a breath. He whipped around. Flashlight raised. Nothing. But the dust on the floor had been disturbed. A thin trail leading from the corner of the room toward the blueprint, as if something had dragged itself just beneath the surface of the dust, toward the wall. Ashford backed out of the stairwell and didn't stop until he was in the car, doors locked, engine on. Back at the motel, he spread the blueprint out on the bed and traced the lines with his fingers. Every answer led to more riddles. Someone had built 6B to contain something they couldn't explain, and someone else had put it back on the rails. Not by accident. The question wasn't just what happened inside the compartment. It was what got out. That night, Ashford dreamed of a train that never stopped. The whistle blew underwater. The cabin doors wouldn't open, and the girls sat across from him, not blinking, not speaking, only watching. In the corner of the compartment, the wall pulsed like it was breathing. Then the dream collapsed into static, and he woke breathless, the tape still playing. The second one, the one with 2 sets of breathing. July 18, 1996. Location: Fort Wright, Kentucky. Elisa's grandfather's cabin. The voice on the phone was brittle, dry, but clear. "You're the one looking into the girls. I've got something. You'll want to see it. Bring a flashlight." The man didn't give his name, but Ashford knew the voice. It belonged to Charles Wyatt, Elisa's grandfather, former railman, widower, lived alone out in the woods east of Fort Wright in a cabin that hadn't seen a phone bill paid since Reagan. Ashford had met him once, briefly during the first wave of questioning. Charles hadn't seemed interested in speaking then. But now something had changed. It took Ashford nearly an hour to get there. The gravel road was more like a memory than a path, swallowed in places by saplings and kudzu. His tires crunched through dead leaves and scattered branches. Birds scattered. No other cars in sight. The cabin sat in a clearing, squat and sun faded. Its tin roof patched with mismatched panels. Smoke curled weakly from a stovepipe. Ashford parked, stepped out, and approached the front steps. The door opened before he could knock. Charles Wyatt looked thinner than he had days ago, eyes sharp, but something behind them was dimming like a fire about to gutter out. "Inside," he said, stepping aside. Ashford entered. The air smelled like cedar and dust with a faint undertone of something earthy, almost fungal. The place was cluttered but not messy. Lived in wooden walls covered in old hunting photographs, railway plaques, and war medals. "She used to stay here," Charles said, motioning toward the narrow hallway. "Every summer until she turned 15. Said it was the only place she could hear herself think." Ashford nodded, waiting. Charles didn't sit. Instead, he walked to the bookshelf and pulled down an old leather-bound sketchbook. The cover was cracked on the spine. "EW," etched faintly in blue ink. "Elise kept this here. Forgot about it. I was cleaning the other day and found it shoved between 2 boards in her room." Ashford took the notebook. It was heavier than expected. He opened to the first page. Drawings, pencil, charcoal, some smudged, some painfully detailed. There were trees, crows, the corner of a train window, a hand. But halfway through, the sketches changed. They became repetitive. The same shape over and over again. A square inside a square, then a circle around them. Sometimes inverted, sometimes jagged, but always the same motif. Ashford turned the book toward Charles. "You ever see this symbol before?" The old man's jaw worked for a moment, but no sound came. Then finally, "Not until 2 nights ago." "What happened 2 nights ago?" "I was asleep, or thought I was." His voice dropped. "Heard a sound coming from the back room. Elisa's old room. Walked in and saw the closet door swinging open. Wind. No wind." Charles looked him dead in the eye. It was breathing. Ashford blinked. Breathing like the air itself was pulsing. "And when I turned on the light, the drawing, this one," he tapped the symbol on the page, "was scraped into the wall, same shape, over and over again, like someone had taken a nail and carved it into the plaster." Ashford's stomach turned cold. Did Elise ever mention anything? Nightmares, anything about the train? She used to say she dreamed of tunnels that weren't connected to anything, just space floating and something following her. He paused. She called it the man who walked between. Ashford shut the notebook. "I need to see that room." Charles led him down the hall. The bedroom was cold. Not the kind of cold you get from lack of insulation, but the kind that makes the bones ache. The window was cracked open. A curtain swayed without rhythm. The walls were plain wood, but one had been painted over poorly. Patch job. New boards. Ashford stepped closer and shined his flashlight at the wall. Beneath the paint, faintly visible under the new layer, the carvings remained. Hundreds of them. The symbol, the square, the circle, scratched into the wood again and again, deep in places, shallow in others, as if someone had been compelled. He touched one of the grooves. It was warm. He turned to Charles. "You didn't touch these. I painted over them. That's it." "Why?" "Because she told me to." Ashford froze. "Elise." The old man nodded slowly in a dream. She was younger, same as she looked when she left for that train. Said, "It's not done with me yet. You have to bury it." Ashford stepped back. The cold in the room had shifted. It was deeper now, not on the skin, inside the lungs. He opened the notebook again, flipped to the final page. One last drawing, not a symbol, a sketch of the inside of a train compartment seen from the hallway. The door was cracked open. Inside, for girls seated at a table. A fifth figure stood behind them, tall, head bowed. His hand was resting on Elise's shoulder. Ashford stared at the image for a long time. He copied the page, photographed it, closed the notebook, and handed it back to Charles. He didn't ask to keep it. Something told him he shouldn't. That night in his car, he opened his briefcase and laid out everything. The logbook, the blueprints, the tape, the photos, and now this drawing. Each piece of the story sat in front of him like a puzzle. But the border was wrong. The corners didn't match. And in the center always was that compartment. Not just a room, not just a space, a threshold. And whatever it was Elise saw in her dreams, it was still open. July 19th, 1996. Location: unmarked track spur outside Terre Haute, Indiana. The coordinates came from a rail engineer Ashford had met by chance. Former North Central Systems analyst, retired since '88. A quiet man with bad eyesight and a memory built like a steel trap. He'd seen Ashford's sketch of the soft compartment blueprint and paused over it for a long time. Then he'd said, "You want the real carriage 6? Not the replica. You're looking in the wrong direction." He circled a spot on a 1970s rail survey map just west of Terre Haute. No name, no spur listed on the current line. A ghost sighting. Train derailed here in spring of '85. The man said. They said they dismantled it. They didn't. They just left it there. Ashford didn't ask how he knew. He just drove. By late morning, he was off paved roads, crawling along a trail of gravel and weeds in a borrowed 4x4. It was humid, the kind of humid that made the steering wheel feel slick in his hands. Bugs ticked against the windshield. No signposts, no fences, just open forgotten land. Then the Trian opened and there it was, carriage 6, or what was left of it, tipped slightly to one side on a sunken railed, half sunk into the earth, the metal rusted and strewn with vines. Moss grew over the windows. One end of the carriage was crumpled from the derailment, but the main body, compartment 6B, was intact. Ashford got out slowly. No sound, no wind. Even the insects seemed to avoid the space around the carriage. The steel door groaned open with surprising ease. Inside, the light was wrong, muted, like the air was thicker in here, slower. Dust floated unnaturally, not falling, just hanging. The compartment was exactly as the blueprints had shown. Same layout, same proportions, but the materials were different, denser. The walls felt too thick, the corners too sharp. He stepped into 6B. The door shut behind him. No click, just silence. He didn't panic. He checked the latch. Still functional, but as he turned back to the room, something stopped him cold. The table in the center of the compartment was clean. No dust, no vines, just a stack of playing cards perfectly arranged in a neat pile. And beside it, a Polaroid. He stepped forward, heartbeat heavy in his chest. The photo was recent, still glossy. It showed the compartment, this exact one, from the same angle, but this time the table was occupied. The 4 girls sat together, not smiling, just looking at the camera. Ashford picked up the photo with shaking hands. He turned it over. Written on the back in blue ink, "We never left." His hand dropped to his side. Then the air shifted. A breeze number. The pressure changed. He turned toward the back wall of the compartment and saw the shape. At first, it looked like a shadow, a trick of the failing light. But it moved. Not toward him. Across the wall, like a figure pacing behind the metal skin of the train. He stepped closer. The wall wasn't right. Pulsed faintly like breath. And in that breath, a sound began to echo. A voice, software, not feminine, not quite masculine either, something old. He watches the watchers. He rides the long route. He chooses the one who stays. Ashford stumbled back. The table rattled slightly. Another photo had appeared. This one was blank. No image, just gray-white static like a failed exposure. But there was a handprint on it, pressed in what looked like ash, larger than human. He didn't wait. He turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the sunlight, lungs gasping for clean air. Behind him, carriage 6 remained silent. But he knew something had changed because when he looked back down at the photo in his hand, the one that had read, "We never left," the message was gone. In its place, a new one had appeared, scrolled hastily, almost shaking. "You brought it back. Back in Fort Wright." The sky cracked with dry thunder. Miles away in Amelia's bedroom, her old tape recorder clicked on by itself. No tape inside, just the sound of knocking. July 20th, 1996. Location: Cincinnati, Ohio. Police evidence vault. The evidence vault didn't feel like a safe place anymore. Ashford had always found comfort in it. Clean cata. Logid, predictable. Rows of files, box truths, waiting for their turn in courtrooms. But today, when he entered the basement beneath the precinct, something felt off. The air was still overpressurized. Fluorescent lights hummed too loudly. He checked in with the night clerk, who didn't even look up from his paper. "Room 3C, the man mumbled. "Under missing persons, July batch." Ashford nodded and stepped through the double doors. He walked past shelves of sealed cases, decades worth of lost guns, torn shirts, wedding rings never reclaimed. At the far end, against the concrete wall, sat the box labeled car 6/incident files/0711 MPP. It looked exactly as he'd left it. First, he opened the lid. The cassette tapes were there, the Polaroids, the logbook copy. But one thing was gone. Elisa's drawing, the one from her grandfather's cabin, the sketch of the girls with the fifth figure behind them. Ashford dug through the files again. Nothing. No trace. No misfiled envelope. No log of it being removed. He asked the night clerk who checked the register and shook his head. "No one's checked anything out under that case ID. Could it be missing?" The clerk shrugged. "Things vanish sometimes. Paper rot, mislabeling. It's not a perfect system." But Ashford knew it had been there. He'd filed it himself. He returned to the table, pulled out the two tapes again. Maddie's labeled recording and the unmarked one. Something noted at the edge of his thoughts. He pressed play on the labeled cassette first. Started as he remembered. Static, laughter, footsteps. But something was different. A new voice, faint at first, his own. Ashford froze. He turned the volume up. He heard himself speak. They never saw the exit. Another pause, then only the mirror. He scrambled to eject the tape, rewound it, played it again. Same thing. His voice recorded weeks ago on a train he'd never stepped foot on. He moved to the second cassette, the ambient one, the breathing. But now it wasn't just breath. It was whispered words, a language he didn't understand. Fractured syllables, rhythm like a lullaby spoken backward. Then his voice again, softer, almost mournful. "I am becoming him." Ashford stopped the tape. The room was silent, but his pulse pounded in his ears. His hands trembled. He looked at the wall behind the table and saw something that hadn't been there before. A symbol faint, smeared in dust, a circle around a square, the same shape Elise had drawn. He wiped at it. The dust clung, oily, not chalk, not marker, as if something had pushed it through from the other side. He backed away, turned off the recorder, replaced the tapes. But as he closed the box, something heavy shifted inside his chest. He was no longer just an investigator, no longer an observer. The story had begun to wrap around him. Later that night, he sat in his motel room with the lights off, the Polaroids laid out on the bed. He arranged them in the order they were found. First, they seemed random, but then he noticed the change. In the first image, the girls are laughing, relaxed, alone. In the second, they're quieter, one of them looking behind her. The third, Maddie glancing to the side. The fourth, the mirror shows a figure. The fifth, a hand on Amelia's shoulder. The sixth, the newest, had arrived that morning at his doorstep, wrapped in nothing but newspaper. He hadn't opened it until now. He stared at the final image. All four girls still sat at the table, but now a fifth figure sat among them. His face was not visible, but the clothes were unmistakable. A dark overcoat, a notepad on the table, a badge on the hip. Ashford stared because the figure sitting among them was him. July 21, 1996. Location en route. Carriage 6 replicated. He didn't tell anyone he was going. Not the precinct, not his partner, not even Claire, who'd been calling every day since the tape. Ashford had spent the last 24 hours staring at that final Polaroid, the one that showed him seated among the girls. It had been taken from outside the window from the hallway. The angle was impossible. He had never been there, not yet, but he would be. He arrived at the East Terminal Yard at 12:14 a.m. No departures were listed on the schedule, but Carriage 6 was there, sitting alone on track 14, unattached. No engine, no crew, and yet the doors were open. He stepped inside. No passengers, no announcement. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air changed. It smelled like ozone and old fabric and something behind it all. Faint and dry and metallic, like blood that had been cleaned and cleaned again, but never quite forgotten. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. He moved down the narrow hall, passing compartments, empty, cold, wrong, until he reached 6 billion. The door was already open. Inside it was exactly like the photos, the table, the bunks, the mirror, and waiting on the table. 6 items. A pack of playing cards, a Polaroid camera, an old audio cassette, a train timetable from 1985, a paper napkin with 4 names written in pencil. A final seat, left open. Ashford sat. He didn't speak. He just waited. Outside, the train gave a soft, impossible lurch as if it had begun to move. Without power, without tracks, without a driver. There were no windows in 6B, just the mirror. At 12:43 a.m., the lights dimmed slightly. He heard breathing, not his. Then a voice just behind his shoulder. "We can't leave. You know that now." He turned. No one there. Only his reflection in the mirror. Except he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the 5th figure. No face, only a distortion, as if the world couldn't decide what it looked like. It leaned forward, inches from his reflection's ear, and whispered something that Ashford didn't hear, but still understood. A single truth too big for sound. Time stopped, then began again in reverse. The lights flickered back to full brightness. The compartment was empty, the table cleared. Ashford was gone. Only the Polaroid remained, sitting neatly where his hand had been, still warm in it. For girls and Ashford, all seated around the table, all looking toward the door, waiting. Back at the station, the train logs remained blank. No record of a departure, no CCTV footage, no staff on duty, only one anomaly. At 12:45 a.m., the analog signal board flickered and registered a brief spike on track 14. Duration 43 seconds, direction undefined, then silence. The case was never officially closed. The 4 girls remained listed as missing. Detective Ashford's file was archived. Status: unresolved disappearance. Date: July 21, 1996. Location: last seen, Cincinnati Union Terminal. Inside the box, 1 photo blank. But beneath the surface, under UV light, a message appeared, faint, handwritten in the margins. "One must stay. The rest wait until it comes back around." July 21, 2025. Location: Chicago Transit Archives. Federal Rail Digitization Project. The archives were never meant to be glamorous, just box after box of forgotten records, derailments, lawsuits, decommissioned schematics, and the dust of a 100,000 vanished commutes. Mira Lang, a second-year history fellow with a focus on transit architecture, had been sorting through Phase 3 of the Midwestern Analog Transit Conversion Project when she found the box. It had no barcode, no assigned log sheet. It wasn't even shelved, just wedged behind a row of accident claims, pressed so tightly into the back wall that it left a square of clean space on the concrete behind it. No one had cataloged it. There was no digital record. The label was smeared with old adhesive faded pen marks. Only 2 words remained legible. Car 6 hold. Mira opened it. Inside, 3 items. A sealed envelope containing a train timetable from 1996 for a midnight departure from Cincinnati to Chicago. The platform listed 14B had been demolished in 2004. Cassette tape labeled only with the date July 21. Ashford. A Polaroid. The image was faint, overexposed, warped slightly from heat or pressure. It showed 5 people inside a train compartment. For young women, 1 man. The man was seated nearest the mirror, his expression unreadable. On the back of the Polaroid, a note written in blocky script. Do not digitize. Mira stared at the box for a long time before loading the cassette into the old playback unit near her desk. She had to press the play button twice before the machine caught. At first static, then a voice. Clear, familiar, weighted by time. A man speaking slowly, precisely. If you're hearing this, you found what they meant to leave buried. I'm Ashford. Detective Jonathan Ashford. Cincinnati PD. Missing persons. Mira sat back, heart slowing. She'd read about the Ashford case. A footnote in an unsolved cluster. Disappeared during a train investigation. The girls had gone first, then him. No leads, no evidence, just a note in the final report. Room 6B listed, but not present in train manifest. On the tape, Ashford continued, they said it was a carriage, but it wasn't. It was a mirror. R. Not of what you see, but of what waits to be seen. The tape hissed. It doesn't come for everyone, just the ones who can see the wrong shape in the right place. A door where there shouldn't be. And when it finds you, you'll feel it. A pause. Then I've bought them time. That's all I could do. But it's still circling, still moving. There is no schedule. There's only the next stop. The tape cut out. Silence. Mira ejected the cassette and placed it gently back into its slot. She turned the Polaroid over again, studied the faces. The 4 girls were never found, and Ashford was never supposed to speak again. That night, Mira dreamed of a train. Empty seats, a slow hum, and through the window a flicker of motion, a figure walking the length of the train from outside, head tilted, hand trailing along the glass, stopping at her window. Inside the dream, she turned away. But in the reflection, she saw herself still staring.